of Rough Gems. It's called VIRGA. Union Hall, for those of you who haven't been to our space, is an exhibition space in downtown Denver, right near Union Station, serving emerging artists. And Rough Gems is our open call curatorial program that we do every year. And I just want to quickly give a little thank you to our sponsors for the Rough Gems program and for Union Hall generally, which are the Coloradan Community Foundation, the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, the Bonfils Stanton Foundation, Colorado Creative Industries, and the Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation. Thank you so much for your support of Rough Gems. So I am Ari. I'm the chief curator at Union Hall. Sorry, I'm just getting around to my own intro. I use she, they pronouns. And just to give a very brief overview of how we'll go tonight, I'm gonna, in a minute, kick it over to Brook and Neya to introduce themselves and walk us through their concept for their show, VIRGA, talk a little bit more about the individual artists and works that are in the exhibition and share some images with us. And then I have a few questions for them to start the conversation. Y'all are welcome to add questions to the chat on YouTube at any time, and we will pick those up right at the end. Appreciate your thoughtful questions in advance, and I'll go ahead and kick it over to you guys.
Thanks so much, Ari. My name's Grix. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Brook Vann, and yeah.
So we just wanted to start out by thanking all of the artists that agreed to be part of the show. Larí García, Judith Leinen, Deya Guy-Vasson, Noa Fodrie, and Martha Russo. They've all been very generous, and it was a pleasure getting to work with all of them.
Yeah, and before we have some presentation slides to share, we also wanted to thank Union Hall. Special thanks to Jess Diaz, who's done a lot of graphic design work and promotion of the show on social media, as well as helping us with installation and coordination. Also Robert Martin, who they are a talented artist in Denver and a painter, and have also helped immensely in coordinating and installation. Also Ari Myers, the chief curator, she's helped immensely in the process of thinking about how to install the show. And also Emma Sawyer, who is the executive director at Union Hall. And now let's share some of our slides. Yeah, there we go. Can you see it?
I can see it.
Okay, great. So yeah, so this is our show VIRGA. And we have a couple slides to start out to kind of like give a bit of an overview if you haven't seen it yet. It closes March 19th. So get there before it closes if you haven't.
Yeah, so we wanted to talk a little bit just about how the show came to be. Brook and I were interested in a lot of the same ideas, and some of them relating to queer theory and authors like Jose Esteban Munoz, and ideas of like becoming and potential for the future. And that sort of led into this idea of a VIRGA cloud, which serves as an analogy for themes that span across the show.
Yeah, and VIRGA, if you don't know that word, it is meteorological cloud, which refers to rain that's in the cloud and due to environmental factors like extreme heat, or even sometimes of extreme coldness, the rain will evaporate and the rain cloud will not turn into a thunderstorm, and the rain will actually not reach the ground. So the result is these sort of long, streaky, cotton-like cloud aesthetics in the sky. And this is something that we've come upon, especially recently in the area of the Rocky Mountains, because on the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains, kind of like Boulder, Denver area, we've been getting quite a bit of rain, and during the winter, snow, lots of precipitation. However, on the western side of the Rocky Mountains, there's been quite a bit of drought. So right over this Rocky Mountain sort of divider line, we've been seeing a lot of VIRGA clouds in the sky. So maybe you have seen them yourselves.
So here the sky and the VIRGA cloud kind of become a visual symbol for ideas of like potentiality, like the rain that doesn't fall gets reformed into something else. So this is kind of how we were thinking about like ideas of queerness, not necessarily as like a particular aesthetic, but a conceptual connection that connects themes like subversion, diversion, and ideas of non-normativity. And we also just wanted to use this as a space to create connections between artists from both different physical and material locations. So we'll just talk a little bit about like the layout of the show. Here is like an overview of where all the works are located. So the image that we were just looking at is in the entrance, and then down to the left, you'll see there's Deya's work on the wall, and then also a video piece in the back, Judith's work, and then it kind of loops around wherever you see numbers 6 and 8. 8 is a L wall that creates like this, a little bit of a private viewing space for one of Larí Garcia's works. And then we have some of Martha Russo's works in the other L wall, and then over to the right. And then Judith's pieces are in the entrance, one of the first things you see when you walk in towards the back left, and then also one located outside of the space. And then Noa's works are on the walls throughout the show.
Yeah, so here's some just general other shots from the gallery. I definitely feel like the sort of flow of this space feels like quite cyclical, as just a sort of, figure 8 almost walking path through perhaps. And yeah, here's some other general shots of the space maybe. The space is mostly darkened with some pretty hotspot lights on the works, as you can see here, and also here. The walls are kind of like a charcoal gray. And yeah, this brings us to the first piece that we want to talk about. And this piece is by a person named Larí García. And they are a nomadic interdisciplinary artist and writer. They explore themes of absence and cyclical timelines in the indigenous Latinx context. Their work is indebted to mutating practices of ancestral spirits, storytelling, and practitioners mining memory out of colonization. With the support of cultural contact points, historical battlegrounds, and land stewardship, they currently live and work in Richmond, Virginia.
So this piece, Skin Trimmer, is made of a silicone material, and that is a material that is can be used in certain mold making processes. And the silicone coats a weed whacker, and that is what creates this shape, is that taken off and then splayed open in this way. And Larí shared some of their writing with us about the work that I thought was just really interesting and beautiful. So I wanted to share it with you all. They write, on a hot July day, you would find Skin Trimmer in a decaying, decrepit shed. Its split, splayed, flower-like body lying in the center of the floor, sweating from Vaseline and lawn debris. The object is an aftermath of a machine birth in the conscious lawn equipment, chasing animals from Stephen King's short story, The Lawnmower Man. Skin Trimmer romanticizes an actor outer of the event. Its sunken alien body meditates on form, texture, and the inorganic of organic material. And that relationship between like machine or like an industrial thing and something that's like very organic or related to the body is something that will come up more than once. And I think that the silicone is a great way to get that kind of analogy, because it's association with like softer surfaces, mold making processes, and then also things that relate to the body, such as sex toys or that kind of thing.
I even thought about like implants and medical devices and stuff too. This material like really called that up for me also.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, and I think another thing to note about this is this mold making process of having the like weed whacker, like, you know, like outside utilitarian device coated in this silicone, which is like very flesh-like material, and then later extracted, and the piece becomes the sort of external form, relates to some of Martha Russo's work, who we will talk about in a little bit. That's the piece perhaps in space. It's connected to the ceiling by a piece of chain, and it's hooked on with like an almost like very large fishing like hook. So it's very like raw sort of looking, I guess. And then the next piece is called Light Tomb. This piece is also by Larí García. We'll play a couple seconds of it, and then I'll talk over it. Can you see it okay? So yeah, so this piece is called Light Tomb, and this Light Tomb piece is documentation of an altar building at water's edge. Light in this video plays a destabilizing role as a visual poem of scaling technologies and contrasting realities. You'll note that the individual here is digging 4 holes in which they will place candles in, and as the video progresses, you'll see a sort of lightning storm occurring as the sort of buildup of the candles being inserted and then lit, much like the lighting of the lightning comes. And I think these also relate to some notion of sending up smoke signals and a sort of messaging device, perhaps. And also there is a connection with Jose Esteban Munoz. In his book, Cruising Utopia, a lot of metaphors relate back to this notion of the sky, or like a sort of becoming of oneself towards the future. Becoming of oneself is sort of on the horizon. And here we also have this sort of sky connection here, as well as a sort of notion of becoming and potential for the future. And this next piece is by Judith Leinen, and this is called Thanks for Using Priority. And this is 3 lightweight USPS flat rate mailers, which are filled with stolen shipping supplies, processed with traditional methods such as pleating and inlay techniques, as you can see on some of the pieces coming out of the boxes. The parcels came with a step-by-step manual with directions to expand the boxes into a spatial graphical ensemble. The 3 parcels are shipped from US to museums in Europe, and now back to Union Hall as a Denver museum or gallery. And these are packing materials, and they focus on this notion of expansion and potentiality as well.
Yeah, so this is another view, and we just thought that they were really fun to have something that can like change form, you know, using the packing materials as something that's like the thing to ship the art, but then here it also becomes art and then like collapses into the boxes itself.
And then this next piece is called Watch the Gap. It's 12 4x6 acrylic prints. And these prints are actually located on the outer window of the gallery. So you actually have to be outside the gallery to view these. And these, the space that these are in actually kind of face the Union Hall public transportation station, which is interesting because most of the nature of these images here relate to public transportation, and sort of recontextualizing these seemingly disparate moments, whether they're related over the gap via texture, via color, via composition, something like that. But they all generally relate to like public spaces and specifically public transportation.
Yeah, like the one in the bottom right-hand corner, it looks like somebody actually waiting for a train. And I feel like that's fun to see in a space where Union Hall is located.
Here's a close-up of just one of the acrylic images.
This is another work by Judith, and this work is called Periodontists. So Judith is really interested in teeth and materials that relate to dental work. So in some of our studio visits, Judith shared her interest, and I think this piece does a really nice job of like combining two very different materials, like something that could be used in dental work, and then the green ribbons kind of look like packing material or something that like holds something together. And the ceramic that she uses take on, some of them are like these, you can see they're like squeezed forms that look like they could be made inside of like a hand, and then other ones become these like more rigid like corner pieces, which kind of look like they would be something to like protect a corner, and they're all like looped together in this really precarious nature with foam, tension, and weight. And one thing that I really liked about this work and a lot of the other works in the show that use what we might consider certain materials in like a quote unquote non-traditional way. So oftentimes ceramics is considered something that's like a craft-based material or decorative. So to use it as part of this piece as like a fastener or something like industrial or like packing is really maybe not what we would expect when we think about ceramics. So then this is a work by artist Deya Guy-Vasson, and they're located in Richmond, Virginia, and they work as part of the curatorial team at the ICA in Richmond. So this work, I think, does a similar thing to one of to the work by Judith that we just saw, but in a completely different way. So this piece uses wire both in the context of like the cord that actually transmits sounds. And then it also uses the wire as kind of like an embellishment. So it's maybe like a functional or industrial material that's like taking on more than one meaning. And they use it, and you can see like in the top part, it's wrapped around the cords that transport sound in this really like decorative way that provides an embellishment. And then it's like crocheted to this leaf structure where then it has these tendrils that are actually speakers that play sound. So it's the thing that is the mechanism for sound, but then it also houses the sound itself in this like really beautiful, unexpected way.
Yeah, and I feel like you'll see the leaf that is sort of coming out of this like nice crocheted copper wire. And then you also see some of the other little speakers, which are what you kind of, the little boxes that you see down below. And I think that those also act as these sort of like foliage or sort of opening up of flower moments in the piece, because as those pieces act as this sort of opening up device in sort of a hardware fashion, the software or even the sound comes out of those points as well. So it's just this sort of like opening of sound and sight as well.
And I think I forgot to mention, but this work is titled Yam.
And I'm not sure you can hear it, but there is sound in there.
Yeah, it's coming through.
And the sound, I would say the nature of the sound is also quite natural and organic in nature. And yeah, fairly ambient as well. It just feels like almost white noise of what you would experience going outside in the summer hearing the crickets.
When I visited the gallery, I think I assumed that the sound that was coming from this work was coming from one of the other video works that's installed. And so it really did become like white noise as just like part of my experience, like moving through the gallery. Like the closer that I got to it at one point, that's only when I realized that it was actually coming from those little like balloons, as you put it. It's super cool.
Yeah, it's super subtle, and it was great having Deya's other work in the show. It's a video that doesn't have sound, so to kind of like to see the works in conjunction with each other, but then also to like experience them from like more than one sense, I think is really nice.
And yeah, the next piece that we're going to talk about is this video piece in the back. And yeah, as you can see in the gallery, it's positioned near Larí's piece and also kind of behind Judith's piece. And we will play just a clip of it. As previously stated, this piece is called Speak of Love, and it has no sound. Can you see it okay? But Speak of Love is a meditation on community and the importance of self-love. As a text, it is a series of questions intended to assess the capacity of these questions. Deya imagined how they wanted their mother to react if they were more open with her about their queerness. They imagined how their mother would respond. Once they wrote these questions, they translated them into their into both of their parents' native languages. They got on the phone with their mother and opened the St. Lucian Creole dictionary. They didn't speak Creole, which is a Caribbean language, but they can understand fragments, common phrases told to children. With their mother, they translated the text and sent it to a cousin with more practice with Creole writing. The video consists of macro footage that pans over their skin. Overlaid on the footage are 3 translations of the questions. Patios is positioned at the top of the screen, Creole is in the center, and the standard American English at the bottom. The duration of each question remains on the screen is varied, getting longer as the video goes on. At certain points, it can become hard to see the text against reflections on the skin, and the viewer may have to wait for the text to become legible again. So yeah, the background, we see portions or sort of like close-ups as a sort of topography of understanding and also a topography of Deya's body themselves. And I think this can read as a sort of like understanding of self, both in terms of outer shell, but also in terms of inner shell too, I think. And also, yeah, because of the skin and the sort of nuance lines within it, I think that we begin to think about culture and experience as well as identity, perhaps too.
Yeah, and I think also legibility, like the feature of like not being able to see the text at times and then it being more apparent at other times, or even like a video being so zoomed in that sometimes we can't tell what we're looking at, and other times we can. I think this is a nice segue into Noa's work. Noa Fodrie, she's an artist and a painter based in Boulder, Colorado, and her work uses layering and abstraction as an active refusal. So in her process, she takes pictures of her body moving and dancing, and then uses that through a process of layering to create these abstract shapes that are very colorful and in a lot of ways reference the body, but maybe we can't really see or tell what we're looking at. Like there's kind of like a play between space and shadow, body and object within the works. And one of the things she says about her works is that she's forcing in place boundaries that people assume they can cross. So in her work, there's this idea of maybe we're looking at something and maybe we can't access it, or maybe like it's something that's not for us, and that's part of the work. And she also says, this is about her process. I think this is also really nice. I hop, skip, and wiggle and dance and document and paint because God, it feels so good to feel safe and whole in my body. So her work is also about this like process of embodiment and doing those actions as a way of like feeling good. This is another one of her works. This one is titled 1-2 Stepping into Sequence. And we can see there's although the work is very different, like with color and shape, it has like that similar layering technique and use of abstraction. And then this work is called Hold Me Close and Stay with Me, Myself, and I. And Noa also was able to do a workshop with Union Hall where she like led us and other participants through like a similar process of like listening to music and then using that as like this sort of embodying process of like drawing and painting and creating our own works. And then in this image, you also can see some of the work towards the front is one of Martha Russo's verbals. And she has two installations of her ceramic sculptures in this space. You can see them both here. And then this is a shot of her work, Lightness of Being. And kind of how we talked about before with Larí's work, the one towards the front, Martha's works are made in like a similar but also very different kind of way, where she's taking objects and immersing them in slip, which is a kind of like a liquid clay, and then firing them so that way they take on this kind of like new shape that was made from an object, but then that object burns away, and now there are these kind of like shells that are new forms. And I think she also is another person who uses materials in like a very maybe like different than we would expect kind of way, like using ceramic, something that we normally associate with things like a vessel, like a cup or a brick, something that builds something. And in a lot of ways, these objects are both of those things, but they're also not. They like become their own different kind of like hybrid forms here. And she normally shows this piece against a white wall. And I think it was really great to have the opportunity to install the work against these walls with like a really dark contrast. And I think it looks very dramatic. So some of the works, you can see like little tidbits of something that might be like recognizable or something that might have like stayed through the firing, like in those like gray lines in the piece in the center. But then other ones, I think, just take on like entirely different forms. So they kind of have like grounding in both things that we know and things that are completely unknown.
Yeah, I think this relates to like notions of translation and transcription. I think like translation would be like the object in its original state takes on much of the principles and characteristics, even post-firing, versus transcription is more of a notion of a sort of change that it undergoes based on the process of dipping in slip and in this case, firing. So it's the sort of new characteristics that it takes on based on the processes. And these are just some more details of that same installation. And then this is Martha's other installation, which are these clusters of her works titled Verbal, part of her Verbal series. And I think these works kind of create like a very sort of garden feeling. You can, if you go to the space there, you can sit in the bench beside them, and they kind of like are almost growing on the left and the right, and the one towards the back is like coming up onto the bench. And this is another great example of like the, again, non-traditional use of materials, where she's using steel, which is like industrial building material, but it's being fired in the kiln, sometimes like with or without ceramics. And like processes of like dipping or just like ways of making that are like not necessarily expected to create these beautiful, very like sort of otherworldly, almost like garden feeling. Yeah, and I think that another interesting thing is the word verbal itself, which means to make a continuous murmuring noise. And I especially feel like this resonates with the fired steel balls. As we were installing them, the balls seemed to kind of like continuously flake these sort of like steel skin all over as we continued to like move around the space. That seemed to be, I don't know, like continuing to like burble up an amount of steel skin maybe as a product of movement.
Yeah, and also kind of relating to like Deya's sound work, you know, that kind of like continuous noise, like kind of like the same thing in multiple different ways. And it's also nice to be able to, again, see like an overlap, like Noa's work being this continuous overlapping of bodies. And then like when you're in the space, being able to see the works kind of like overlap each other and like begin to like have conversations and create different or new associations. Well, thank you so much for joining us and listening to some of our thoughts.
Thank you both so much for your walkthrough. That was like everything I wanted and more. I just saw the show a few days ago since I wasn't there for install, and there's just so much nuance in the connection between all of these works. And I just have to commend you on like how thoughtful your choices of artists and selections of works were, and how the story that you weave, you know, throughout all these works and the kind of connotations that blend them or lend them to each other. It's just like an incredible show. And I have enjoyed learning about all of these artists so much. So thank you for your hard work.
Thank you.
So just as a reminder to everyone who's listening, if you have any questions for Brook and A, you can place them in the YouTube chat. I'm going to start out with a few questions of my own, and then we'll turn to some audience questions. So we've gone through and talked about all of the artists that you've worked with, but I think we'd like to know a little bit more about both of you as well. So I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit more about your practice as artists, since you're both artists as well, other exhibitions you've curated before, and other creative ventures that you're involved in. So a little more about your background, I guess.
You wanna go first?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I am currently a grad student at CU Boulder, getting my MFA in ceramics, which I think maybe you can tell by my enjoyment of talking about ceramic and craft works. Yeah, so, and I make like large scale abstract works that use like vessels and references of vessels to like create about bodies and like categorization and that sort of thing. I'm originally from the Northeast, and I lived in Virginia for a little while where I met Brook. And I've worked on like curating a few other shows before this, and it's just something that I really enjoy, getting to work with other artists and focus on what they're doing instead of doing it myself. And I think too, it's a really great way to like create community and to bring up conversations that maybe I'm interested in, but somebody else is doing in like a more like salient or direct or even better way. So I think that can be fun, but that's not related about me. Maybe you want to talk now?
Sure. Yeah, I'm coming to Colorado from Virginia. I recently got my MFA in new media from VCU. What else to say about this? I guess, yeah, my degree is in new media, but I guess my focus was on like virtual reality sound, otherwise known as ambisonic sound. And I also do a lot of work with data and like transference and transcription of data from usually one form, like numbers, into data visualization, like graphics, and usually also into data sonification as well. And most of the data comes from things related to like gender and identity. I think that probably the last major show that I worked on was my MFA thesis show. So yeah, this project we've been working on for like 7 months now or so. Yeah, I think that this has been like maybe the like largest project that I've worked on since then. But yeah, as echoed by A, it's been really nice to sort of like deal with these like interesting concepts that I think are related to both of our works generally as well, but having the sort of distance of installing someone else's work. In some ways, that's been quite nice.
I always find it interesting when I work with guest curators who are artists, like it either goes kind of one way or the other. Normally, it either is folks who are sort of like interested in continuing to explore a thread that they are sort of like already working on and finding other artists that are working in the same vein or with similar materials. And yeah, like I think A said it perfectly, like people who are saying something in a way that you are like, oh, they're saying it even like better than I could, or if not better, just in a way that it comes from their experience that's so different from your experience. Or it goes the other way where artists like just don't want to do anything that has to do with their work and they go like far on the other side. So it's been really cool to like, as I've gotten to know you both, see how your work also is sort of like both of your work could be in this exhibition, right? And it would make total sense, I think, in this collection of artists as well. So it's been really neat to learn more about both of you alongside all of these great artists that you included. Which brings me to my next question. How did you select the artists that are in the exhibition? And what are some of the connections that you saw between them in creating the proposal? Because, you know, the show obviously changes a lot from the proposal stage to now. So I'm just curious how you know some of these folks and some of those connections.
Yeah. So to begin, Larí García and Deya Guy-Vasson attended VCU. They were actually in the Sculpture and Extended Media program, which is very similar to where I was studying, basically just the next door studios. They showed with me and we were in the same courses and such, and they were also dealing with notions of like potentiality, also notions of gender and identity and sometimes queerness. In fact, one of the places that we started was reading both Larí García and Deya Guy-Vasson's theses, because they're published online. Highly recommend reading them. They're really great pieces of writing. But yeah, just like looking at these notions, I think we really enjoyed reading Larí's and how they were talking about vibrant matter and these sort of like fluid notions of hierarchy and specifically for vibrant matter, these notions of like dirt and dirty. And then for Deya Guy-Vasson, they talked a lot in their thesis about these notions of steel. And steel has been a really interesting sort of material concept to them because in steel, once you create an impact in it, it holds it. So no matter how much you try to like bend it back, it will always hold that sort of impact or that, you know, the bend that you mark.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that sort of, you carry around these like experiences and these sort of lines, and that sort of helps to weave together perhaps your identity. And I think that we saw this also in some artists here in Sioux Boulder.
Yeah, one of my favorite cheesy things to say about clay is that this idea that clay has memory. It's like similar to steel where the particles tend to like remember ways that they were bent, and then those like ways can show up again later. So I think it was so, you know, thinking about, I think we kind of started first with like a list of artists whose work we were like, oh my God, we really love this. And this feels super exciting and fresh and relevant. And then like looking at like, okay, well, what are intersections? And then, you know, there are like relationships to materiality or like non-traditional use. And like Martha Russo is using ceramic to make these sculptures that maybe you wouldn't know are ceramic. And yeah, and I think also too, like having recently moved here, getting to know artists in the area, this show was like a really great way to be like, okay, well, I know of this person's work and I think it's connected in this way. And like, what a great way to get to meet people. So that's kind of how, like, it turns out like Judith ended up being like my neighbor, but we didn't know we lived close to each other. And Martha I met at CU, and Noa is also a grad student at CU.
One thing that I love about the Rough Gems program as well is like inevitably all the curators bring their own networks of people from like, because Denver and Boulder area are like, it's such a city of transplants. Like there's so many people that are coming to it from elsewhere. And so inevitably like bringing all your networks, I think one of my favorite parts is seeing how these connections hopefully can create more dialogue for maybe future collaborations or future opportunities where, you know, these artists are now aware of each other and the connections between them that they may not have been previously. So it's always fun to see how those connections are created. This next question, I feel like you went over a little bit, but I'm going to read it anyway. And if there's anything that you want to add to this, great. And if not, we can just skip it. But in conceptualizing VIRGA, you referenced the VIRGA cloud as an analogy for the way that the works that are included in the exhibition are transdisciplinary, resist categorization, expand to create space for imagining new futures and alternate ways of existing outside of and within current systems, reading from your curatorial statement. Can you talk a little bit more about the VIRGA cloud and how it weaves together with your concept for the show, and sort of like what part in the stage did this like apparition of the VIRGA cloud become part of your conversations about the show?
Yeah, I think the cloud was Brook's idea. We had like a list of artists that we were like excited about, and we had kind of written down like these other words, Brook was also thinking about these ideas of like desire lines, I think that you wrote about in your pieces. Mm-hmm. But it's like basically like desire lines are like if you see like a sidewalk, and then you know how sometimes there's like that path off the sidewalk that's like slightly closer, so you can just kind of like cut around. Yeah. So we were kind of thinking about that as like the overarching idea, like things that exist kind of like off the path, or like a new way of doing or looking, or something like that. And then I think also having like newly moved here, like looking at the sky and being like, well, what is that? Brook came up with this really great idea of the VIRGA cloud. And it felt really relevant because it's like related to our geographical, is that a word? Location. And also, and then also served as like a larger analogy to maybe like talk about the ideas in like a more like concrete way. Do you have anything to add to
that? Yeah, not really. I think that, yeah, both of us were definitely reading Munoz Cruzing Utopia, and like I feel like a lot of the analogies about a sort of becoming or even unbecoming for the future are supported by like looking to the sky as like something to like hope for or look forward to. And I think we found ourselves also like in moments of lockdown, or just like newly experiencing Boulder, looking up at the sky as like a sort of new setting or a new home.
Thanks. I'm glad I actually asked that, because the desire lines and how that as like an alternate possibility for what the exhibition could be is like so interesting to think about. And also I'm realizing that maybe on our website we should create like a little bit of a reading list for VIRGA for people who are excited about that, because I would love to have Larí and Deya's theses linked, and then obviously Cruising Utopia should be linked, and yeah, a couple more of these things that we've brought up, and Vibrant Matter would be another good one. That's like, I read that like first semester of grad school, and it like broke my mind in such a good way. So yeah, I think we should probably link those somewhere for anybody who's listening along and is interested. We'll try to get some links up on the site. So curious about sort of like coming from the proposal stage all the way through to the images that we saw in your presentation. I'm kind of curious about your vision for the viewer, or the audience's like experience within the exhibition space, and how did this come together in your curatorial process?
Yeah, I think that starting out with some of the proposal, we definitely had a lot of works that we wanted to show, but just like due to like some cost speed bumps, ended up not being able to show. But the positive side of it was a lot of new works were actually created from it, which has been like super refreshing to interact with and think about, especially Deya Guy-Vasson, who proposed a large based sculpture. It's kind of like the stump of a tree with furniture legs on it, and it has like a large sub speaker on it. But yeah, they ended up making this new piece called Yam for the show, and weaving together this like really beautiful copper wire and sort of like flowering plant, rather than the other piece may have been like a bit more of something like a natural structure postmortem or modified. And I think that, yeah, some of those things allowed for like a more active and like maybe a more blooming sort of circular view within the gallery space, I think. Yeah, that's so nice.
And so many like happy accidents. I think too, like thinking about like Deya's work in relation to Martha's, like I feel like I get like botanical references from both. So I think we kind of started out with like more, we want these artists to show work than like we want these specific works. And I think the works just like worked together. I don't know, because I think because all of the themes are similar, they were just gonna kind of like end up being what they were gonna be. And I think that kind of fits in with the show too, like and I guess maybe it's the nature of any show is like, okay, you have these things, like how are they gonna come together in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, and I think also like I think like being like installing the show and being in the space with all the different works, I think brought it to new life as well. Like someone like Larí García and Martha Russo, who I think like if you're in this space and looking at the works, they have a lot of like connection, both like process and even like aesthetically in terms of ends. However, like without, putting the works together, I'm not sure that they necessarily would have been in the same space at the same time. Though, like after this moment of having them together, I think that they have actually some things in common, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think also too, like it brings like a nice time thing too, because I feel having Martha has like a series of work that she's been working on called Nomos, and that's something that she's been working on since grad school 25 years ago. So to have that, like an artist like her in conjunction with like someone like Larí, who just finished, they just finished grad school like a year ago. Is that right?
Yeah, May 2021.
I don't know. And then I think that's a really fun thing too, like to see how things change over time, and then like the conversation between people at like two very different like stages in their career.
Yeah, I really appreciated having some age diversity in the show, because sometimes because we lean towards more emerging and early career artists, a lot of the time that means like younger in age, but we've also shown some artists who like are more mature and more established alongside, and those connections sometimes can be some of the most powerful. I always love bringing somebody into the mix who is a little more experienced. And sorry, my sounds are going off. I guess that kind of goes to another question. And actually, before I do that, just a reminder to everybody that is out there on YouTube, feel free to add your questions to the chat. I'm going to just do this one more, and then we'll look to the chat and see what we got in there. But the identities and backgrounds of each of the artists is really significant to the stories that they're telling within their individual works. And so I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more about how the works in VIRGA relate to some of the identities of the artists, something that you touched on a little in your talk, but just curious if you have any other further thoughts on that.
Yeah, I feel like that can be, I don't know. I feel like that can be a tricky thing to talk about, not because of like not wanting to talk about like race, gender identity, sexuality, or that sort of thing. But I feel like a lot of times in context with artists, like to foreground their identity in a way where maybe like they're not talking about, like, I don't know, I guess maybe like I would, if the artists were here, I would like pose the question to them, but maybe like I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable like talking about it for them. I think like some aspects of like the artist's experience or identities is like embodied through the work, through like acts of like refusal or like subversion or like Deya thinking about this notion of like care. So I think they're there in that sort of way. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that, you know, like in Speak of Love, Deya actually like talks about it a little bit in the description of the video, in terms of this being like a compilation of like languages of their parents' native languages, actually laid over their own skin as a sort of like reckoning of like heritage and identity, but also a sort of reconciliation of self-love. And yeah, like trying to sort of compile all of those things in varying opacities and see through them, maybe.
Yeah, and I think too, it was like interesting to thinking about like basing a show around like certain conceptions of like queerness, and then also showing artists that maybe don't identify as queer or not like foregrounding their identity as like part of the show, but then more thinking about like queerness as like a verb or like a way to think about something, like to queer or
Like a mode of working.
yeah, exactly. So I think that like the identities become more about like the ways of seeing than they are about like a sort of like maybe static notion. But I mean, I don't know. I can't really speak for what other people would say.
Yeah. And
No, oh, sorry, go ahead, Brooke.
I think, I don't know, we've talked about this a bit, but like defining queerness as something that is related to like a sort of unbecoming, or like an undoing and unlearning of something. And I feel like the nature of a lot of these works is like maybe using the material and not necessarily the way that is sort of like becoming, or like the way that it's like meant to be. So like a sort of like queering of materiality, or like perhaps queering of purpose within it. So.
Yeah, thank you. I kind of selfishly asked the question because I think that very often the idea of like gender identity or racial identity, those backgrounds can be foregrounded in a lot of conversations around artist work to an extent that it can almost like cover up all those other subtleties that are there. And it's something that like I take a lot of issue with, that I see a lot in the art world these days. And it's like, it's almost just like the point A to point B answer. Like it's the easiest thing almost. So then I think it's like a dumbed down, like there's so much more subtlety to be seen in people's work. And sometimes it just gets thrown into this category, or like categorized in a way that just makes it really easy to be like quickly consumed versus like taking a long and like very studied look at people's work. And so, yeah, I think all of these artists really resist categorization into just like their work is not just about identity, but at the same time, like there is this like storytelling quality that comes through in all of the works that feels extremely personal. And so I think they all kind of like defy those bounds of just being walked into like a story about who they are, where they come from specifically. There's just so much more there. And I think it's, I hope, encouraging to younger artists, you know, to see artists like the folks that you have in this exhibition that, you know, are pushing outside of those boundaries and resisting just being characterized into like what their gender identity is or what their racial background is, and kind of looking at like those subtleties of how to tell a more interesting story about where they're seeing themselves in the world, I guess.
Yeah, I think too, or also like thinking about like resisting visibility as like a mode of resistance, like what does it mean to be visible? And it's like visibility for who like the context changes depending on like, I don't know, like how or where someone might identify, like might change depending on like vulnerability and a million other things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in Noa's artist statement, I think she says something like what are you / are you sure, as like a biracial person. And I think that question, I think that question could be applied to like all of these artists probably have an experience with questions like that in reference to their art practice. And so I appreciate the like pushing away of those boundaries and looking for more nuanced ways to view these works and the things that are being communicated through the work. I am not seeing anything. Oh, wait, there is one. Sorry. Okay, one from the chat. How did you find the process of putting together the show? What did you like about it, and what do you feel you have learned?
Oh.
That's a curatory question.
What did we learn? Well, there's a pot of gold at the end of the room. No, I'm just kidding.
Tell us where it is.
Yeah, no, please. Yeah, I think, do you want to start or you want me to?
No, you can go.
I think I learned a lot about like even just like in Brook and I's like interpersonal, like we've never worked on a project together. So learning about each other's like working styles and stuff like that. I think it's been a great way to like play off of strengths. Like Brook has like fantastic like graphic design skills and stuff. I don't know, just like certain people.
I'm gonna go ahead and say yes, that's true.
Certain people have like different strengths, or even like I was thinking about one day we were installing, we're like positioning some of the burbles, and Robert is like, oh, you should move this there. And I was like, and they were completely right. And I was like, how do you just like, they just have this like skill where they can just like see where something was going to look good. And I was like, okay. So I think like just becoming more comfortable with maybe like, okay, that's a part that I'm not good at. And like you are, and like, that's okay. Neither of us has to be like, I don't know, just like working with what we have. I don't know. That's, I think, one of my main takeaways. What, did you learn anything?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I definitely like learned a lot about like working with another person on this type of project, especially like I feel like some of the like writing components in like previous work iterations, I've been tasked with like having to do it all myself, but it's been really nice to have like another person to kind of like bounce ideas off of and like talk about. And I think that's felt like really expansive. And I'm like, it's like cast a way wider net around like, artists and even like the field of ideas and like connections, I think. And yeah, I think like even installing the show, I think as A stated, like everyone involved brought like lots of specific skills that like maybe I didn't have. Especially like, I don't know, A like had some great great thoughts, and so did you, even when we had that meeting about like the experience of the works in space and the sort of like foresight of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I've like been used to like spending most of my installs like troubleshooting tech. And I didn't really have that during this show, which was super amazing. But yeah, I don't know, like thinking about the experience of like objects and like ceramics or even paintings was something that like a skill that I maybe didn't have as much. So
yeah, and also having a team of people is great. Like, I don't know, I feel like most times when I'm installing anything, it's like, you're doing the painting and the patching and the moving and all this, and like everyone, there was just so many people and so much help, and everyone was so talented and great. So I guess maybe one thing that I would learn is like, if you can do something with a team, like do it.
It's definitely gotten much better over the years for Rough Gems. I'll just say that. Like by now we're like a pretty well-oiled machine. Of course, there's like always more to learn, but yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Like, so thankful for all the help that we have at Union Hall and all the folks that make doing this a reality, because For folks who are maybe just tuning in and aren't familiar with the Rough Gems program, it's three-week exhibitions back to back to back with essentially like 10 days in between to turn over the shows. So it's a lot of pressure to do a lot of the planning on the front end. And at least for me, like, my brain, I'm not the type of person that can always like make a layout and then stick exactly to it. Like I very often will make the layout just to have something, but I end up not really using it, and seeing how things go in space. But having to do this program and work with other people's visions has actually made me so much better at that, because I can like catch potential snags that they might not be looking for because you're thinking so much about the work, whereas I'm just thinking about like, is somebody going to fall over on this thing? And so I think over time, like, this group that we've put together to work on Rough Gems, it's always so interesting to see what the guest curators bring and what we are able to, what input we have or not. And yeah, so fun. I have a question that's pretty similar to that one that I just read, and that looks like the only one that I have from the chat so far. So final call on questions from the chat, but I still do have a few more here. And it was sort of similar, like, what was your experience like producing VIRGA as part of Rough Gems? But in addition to what you learned, what advice would you give to emerging curators or folks who are interested in possibly curating a show about creating an exhibition?
We both leave each other out.
I think that my advice might be, I think that like whether you're creating a show or like even creating a body of work, I think there's often a lot of pressure to like come up with like one like amazing overarching theme and like find everyone that like fits exactly to that like few words or that sort of thesis statement. But I think that oftentimes the interesting connections come amongst the sort of seemingly disparate works or seemingly disparate folks that you feel strongly about, or you feel like have something interesting to say within their work. And I feel like try to forefront that, and I think the connections will come later on. I think that's my suggestion.
Yeah, I would say maybe two things. If you're thinking about curating a show, I would say do it. I think there's so many artists, and I feel like artists are the kind of people who will be making the work regardless of if there's a show or not. And most of them, not most, I don't know. I kind of feel like most artists are just looking for a place to show their work. So I think it would be great if you're thinking about curating a show to do it. And I think it also would be, I think if you center like the art, like let the artists do what they want, I think that'll, I think that'll go a long way, like, because to just like create space for someone who like has an idea of how their work might look best or should look, I think is like a really generous thing that can be like beneficial for everyone.
That's really good advice. I think making exhibitions in my mind is kind of like making a film where you cannot do it like by yourself, do all the roles, right? Like the artists are bringing something to the table and then you're interpreting that. And then the space is also telling you what you can and can't do. And the budget is also telling you what you can and can't do. And all these factors create this other work of art that is only a product of all the tiny little parts that come together. And I think it's a great exercise for all artists to do, because it also, I think, gives you like more of a perspective into like what it takes to work collaboratively in that way. And then next time you're involved in an exhibition, maybe you have a little more perspective on that. I think it's always been one of the highlights of Rough Gems for me, is working with artists on sometimes their first shows. This is a good question from the chat that sort of relates to that. How are these artists inspiring your own work, research, and interests?
How are they inspiring? Yeah, I find them all really inspiring in different ways. I think I was thinking a lot about dirt and like ideas of like dirtiness in my own work. And then like sort of right after that, I read Larí Garcia's thesis, and they talk about this like journey of searching and like break it down into like the 4 layers of soil. And I don't know, I just thought that it was such a great way of looking at it. And then so seeing like the ways people are applying ideas, and Martha, I think, is like hugely inspirational, like with like the amount of things that she's doing and like her generosity. Like when we were working with her, she had Brooke and I over to a studio visit, and she was just so like generous and kind, and she even gave us snacks, which, you know, is always appreciated. So I guess yeah, I mean, I guess they're all like inspiring in like a different way, but I think it's like exciting to see people working with ideas that I find relevant, because it's like, okay, these like do deserve a place, and these artists are like making space for these ideas. So I think on that level, yeah, it definitely like informs my own practice. Do you?
Yeah, I think that for me, within this process, I got to meet Noa Fodrie, and I think that talking with her about some of my ideas worked interestingly with some of the thoughts that I've had about embodiment, also about movement. I think, and even dance as like relating to notions from the Fluxus movement as like performing in the everyday, and not having necessarily it to be like a theatrical movement, but sort of in Noah's case, taking photos of body movement and turning them into paintings, similar to some things that I've been doing with taking some movements of the body and turning them into sound. And yeah, thinking about things like coloration and composition, as well as layering and opacity, feel like something particularly interesting to me. And then, yeah, I think reading some of Larí's thesis as well as Deya's thesis, and notions of like materiality and like fungibility were particularly interesting. Yeah.
I think this is sort of a good place to kind of wrap it up with one final sort of multi-part question, as I'm very known to do, sorry. I'm curious about what you both have coming up, upcoming projects, any of the artists in VIRGA, if they have anything coming up soon, and then sort of linking into that, if you have any other shows that you're working on curating, and if not, if there's a dream project in the future that you would like to work on.
Yeah, I guess maybe to start, we can talk about some of the things that some of our artists have coming up. Deya Guy-Vasson, I think I maybe mentioned, is currently the curator assistant at the ICA Richmond. And they, yeah, are just about to open, maybe just opened a really big show, but they kind of weekly have programming. And Larí García is teaching at VCU right now. I don't think they are constantly making new works, but I don't think they have a show on the books at this moment.
Yeah, Noa, I just saw, is building an immersive sort of like installation space that's going to be all the walls like completely painted. I think that's going to be really cool. Martha has a bunch of upcoming projects. She has a solo show in the fall of 2023 at the University of Colorado Springs, curated by Daisy McCowan and Joy Armstrong. And she also has a show with Art Knots in Bethlehem, and then one coming up in Columbia. So keep an eye out for that. Judith has a show in Frankfurt this summer, And who else? Did I miss anyone?
Yourself?
Myself. I have a work in the King exhibition at CU coming up.
Oh, awesome.
And I do have some ideas for projects if anyone has any space they want to lend me. If not, it might be a backyard art show coming soon to a summer near you.
Anyone has a backyard, a garage, a basement, a very well-funded gallery, museum, A is the person to.
And I am working on a data sonification project right now for a group called Mortality Tabs in the UK.
Cool. And then finally, any future collaborations between you two, or would there be one again? I guess is worth asking at the end of this process.
I don't know, maybe like maybe we can make cookies together or something.
No,
I'm just kidding.
Let's take the stakes down a lot. Yeah.
I would definitely work with Brooke on something again. They're, yeah, a lovely human. 10 out of 10 would recommend.
Yeah, I concur. I think, yeah, I would be interested in doing a project like this again, I think.
Well, thank you guys again for all of your hard work. This is such a beautiful exhibition. I'm so glad that I got to spend some time with it and really kind of like take time to watch all the video work and move through the space and listen to the sounds and stand with Martha's work. It's came together so well. And I'm so happy that Union Hall got to host it as part of Rough Gems. Gonna go ahead and wrap us up here. Thank you again to everybody who tuned in this evening for your questions and for your support of this exhibition. Don't forget to go see VIRGA at Union Hall before it closes on March 19th, which is this Saturday. And final one more thanks again to the Colorado Community Foundation, Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, Pomfrey Stanton, Colorado Creative Industries, and the Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation, as well as our Union Hall team, Jess, Emma, Robert. Thank you all for all your hard work. Thank you, Brooke and A. Thank you to all the artists in this exhibition. And we'll catch you in a couple weeks for another curatorial talk with our third and final exhibition of the Rough Gems series, Made Known. So yeah, see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.